Hi, and welcome to another episode of A Father and His Son. I'll kind of share that perspective. So, like I said before, when you're saying that you have to do this, in my head, I'm like, no, you don't. I mean, you're choosing to do this, but you don't have to. I could just get away with it and move forward. But the second thing that was going in, after you would share why you're doing it, then I'd be like, well, all right, I did do that. I do have to accept responsibility for that. I can't deny it. And then the third thing that happened before we got to the lay down and the strategy was, I want to let you know that I love you. And we'll come to that part because, of course, looking back, I'll share my perspective on that. Now, I will say, man, I don't know how you did it, but the level of accuracy that you had in that one place, like there was a difference between a spanking from you and one from mom.
But there's a reason for my doing it the way I did, and I'll tell you why.
Yes, but the thing is, I appreciated yours more because clearly I would test mom a little more. But the thing is, her, she would kind of catch you where she could catch you because I was moving around, knowing that I could get away with moving around a little more. Now you had us lay down on the bed, so you can't really do too much there. Although I will say, I can remember several times when I wore at least 4 or 5 underwear.
Yes.
Trying to cushion the blow.
Oh, yes, and I was aware of this.
I know.
I was aware that you weren't as fat as you looked.
You had the scrawny kid up top. You're like, wait a minute, your legs are not that big.
but back to that point about the accuracy. The reason I made sure that it's the same spot, it's because I wanted you to feel it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I felt it.
Because I didn't intend to have to be spanking you many times.
Oh, yeah. No.
I wanted this to count that I didn't have to do it many times. Because now you would feel what it is like and decided that against violating my rules.
So in all fairness, this is referencing a normal child. Not one that was very adventurous and but in all seriousness, no. I mean, I can appreciate that, and like I said, I could appreciate that because I could sit down and be okay, or I could move around. I got the pet, but before we even get to that, so and when we look at the discipline aspects of it, right? Even after there was the discipline, right? You would still sit us down afterwards and say, I love you. Here's why I had to do that. And I don't want to have to do this again. But there are effects. There's cause and effect.
Right.
You can't always get away with it. You have to understand there are consequences to your actions. And that was something that I didn't fully grasp, of course, in the early beginnings, but over the years, I had a greater appreciation for it because I was like, well, okay, there's purpose to this. It's not just I'm frustrated with you, and so I'm spanking you.
Good point, because we counsel individuals, our families, parents, that you never spank your child in wrath. because then you can really injure the child.
Right.
Not only impacting the child's psyche, but physically injuring the child. Now, again, these days it's totally different than our days, because
sure
now it's easier to call this number that is given, and you can call that number, and so on. And so parents get a little hesitant to even try to control their children, and which is not a good thing.
Right.
But I want to also get into this aspect of it, where you said when your mother spanked you, she would spank just, different places and so on. And there were times when she would say, well, when your father comes home, I'll let him know. Now,
I didn't like that.
and here's a thing that needs to be really understood. That there are a couple of approaches to this.
Right.
All right. When your father comes home, he'll deal with you. Okay. Now the father comes home. If the father takes this kind of authoritarian, dictatorial approach, and kind of just lay you out and so on, then what happens is you dread the time when your father comes home.
Oh, that's a good point.
You're not looking forward
point.
with great anticipation for your father to come home.
Right.
I used to relish the fact that in the workplace there were certain things that transpired and so on. But once I got home and I saw my wife smiling and my children running toward me, that was the world. So if the child feels that, well, I'm going to be punished severely or whatever when daddy comes home, then it is creating a kind of animosity and a resentment for the father. So the mothers should be careful also as to how they make those statements, because then it's setting up the father to be the bad guy. When he comes home, he's going to really deal with you and all of that. So there is that delicate relationship between informing the parent, whichever parent is out or whatever, and so when that parent comes home, the children should still feel the love. They should still feel the love, and that was one of the things that I tried to preserve, the love from my children, because I didn't want you to grow up and resent me. And of course, I'm a Christian person too, so I wouldn't want that. So I tried to deal with it in a delicate way, but at the same time in a way that you would understand. And I knew that there were things that were done behind me.
Oh man!
but of course, that's a fact of life.
But we'll get to the dreams later on in life. But I definitely can appreciate that, because again, if I'm talking about looking back, right? When I look back, I appreciate the fact that you sat me down and you had the talk, the preamble before the discipline, right? Because at least, again, I know this is not something that's out of frustration. This is something that is thought through, and it's not just a reaction to something. And then after, then it also let me know that in discipline, there's love.
Yes.
And I think when we look at it from a Christian standpoint, that's the same thing, that the viewpoint that we have of God, where God loves us, so he chasteneth us, right? Yes. But you don't necessarily when you're certain ages or you don't think about it that way, you don't look at it as a loving action to discipline.
That's right.
You think of it as, man, that's harsh. You're disciplining me.
That's punitive.
Yeah, like why are you going to punish me if you love me? If you love me, then you won't punish me. But it's just the opposite. It's because you loved me why you had to discipline me.
That's right.
So that I would not go down a certain path thinking that there are no consequences to my actions.
And speaking of down a certain path, and you can really even create a segment for this, because children, especially boys, in those days when you were growing up, they well, actually, even when I was growing up, and I noticed that there were boys who would just go off the rails. They would wander off, and they would do certain things, and those were things that I couldn't find myself doing, because I was raised in a Christian home, and my parents wanted to make sure that we went to church.
Right.
They taught us that there are certain words that we would not use. And so with that being instilled in me, as I grew up and I got married and started having children, then some of those values are translated into my raising my children. Because when you look at some of the directions that young people are taking, even in our time right now, you see that children are caught up in certain activities that they're not acceptable, but because of the I would say the latitude that they have in not only expressing themselves, but effecting certain actions that impact others negatively, and there's nothing to really restrain them, then they continue. So I believed that I should try to steer you in a direction that will prevent you, hopefully, from getting involved with certain other boys that may be going in a different direction.
Yeah, and I think it's, when I look at, I'll put it like this: I can definitely tell there's a shift in, generation to generation to generation. I can tell you that the discipline that you gave us, and me specifically now, the discipline that you gave me helped me to really understand boundaries, right? So you can test the boundaries, but if you test the boundaries, there's a consequence to that testing of the boundaries. And I think, with the free lateral, not wanting to really discipline kids, because of how some of society has or is at this point, to be frank, there's a hesitancy to bring that type of discipline. But I can tell you, if I didn't have that type of discipline, I would have turned out completely different. And I think, as we continue the series and we get into some of the things that I experience or some of the things that I've done, there will be a greater understanding of why, even though I did certain things, it still was back here as to consequences.
Right. And that is the problem, the point with that because there are, well, with some families, I imagine there are, but it appears from observation, from what we see on TV, and you hear read in the news and all of that, it seems as though many parents don't discipline the children the way they should.
Right.
Some of them may even actually, at an attempt to discipline, abuse the children.
Right. Yeah.
And then and then there are the others who take more like a laissez-faire approach, and not applying discipline for fear of the authorities, or for fear of comments from others and all that. Right. But this is an area where parents need to be careful, especially these days, when how much do you value your child? You know, you have to consider that. How much do you value your child? Do you value your child enough to discipline, to apply good discipline, not abusive discipline, corporal punishment to the extent where a child is physically injured and those kinds of things. You don't do that. Right. You know, but that's why some people resort to timeouts and you know, and so on, and just denying the child the use of certain toys, or going to certain places, and, you know, entertainment and so on, in an attempt to rein the child in. The problem with some of that is that some children don't learn that way. Mm-hmm. And so, a little time out, so what? Yeah. Or, you know, go to your room.
Right.
And, you know, okay, I go to my room, I get on my iPad or my tablet or whatever it is, and so on.
So not really a punishment.
Not really a punishment. And some of some parents are genuinely trying to find a way to discipline the child in a helpful, wholesome way. And so they will need to read books. They will need to study the biblical approach. They will need to just maybe go to conferences and seminars or whatever it is. But the point is, you have to make a good effort to discipline your child and to bring the child up in a helpful, wholesome way, so that the child's personality will reflect a good background.
Right. So I think that goes back to, you know, when we talk about how to discipline, or, you know, the degree of discipline, I think it goes back to not reacting or not doing something when the emotions are high.
Yes.
Because at that point in time, I can see how if my emotions were heightened and I was angered over a situation, I could see how someone could, you know, just go too far with it because the emotions are behind it. And I say that because, I mean, if you look around at society, the way kids are nowadays, like, I can see how they could push you that far. But the thing that I go back to what you've always done, you know, when I was growing up, was I can never remember a time, and don't ever think there is one, where I felt like you were spanking me out of anger. Because every time that we had, you know, we did the preamble, you know, so even if there would have been,
that's right,
the preamble pretty much got rid of it. Yeah. And then, you know, afterwards you talked about love. So I think the key there in the discipline area is it cannot be driven by emotion. It has to be driven by, you know, logic, or not necessarily logic, but less cause and effect type deal. But not because you're angry and so you want them to feel that type of anger as well.
Then there's another aspect to it. There was a time when